All right. Good morning, everyone. Very happy Friday. My name is Sri, and glad that everybody could make it to this call. Uh, as was committed in the last call, we have a significant amount of updates to share. And really, Shiva and the team have been actually spending sleepless nights in getting us to the new version 3. So over to you, Shiva. Please take it away. And then I'll keep an eye on chat as usual and seek Ryan's help to also keep an eye on chat. And between us, we will answer any questions that you may have. Thank you. With that, over to you, Shiva. All right. I guess Shiva's just want to join. Let's give him a minute. Shiva, are you there? Okay, I can see the screen share. Thank you.
Okay, very good morning, everyone. As we said, we basically are launching what we would traditionally call V3, but essentially this is a version that we are putting together. It took quite some time because basically there are a lot of elements that we are essentially thinking through, making them right and essentially making it more useful from the perspective of from all of you in terms of how can this particular system be used to very quickly track and basically find problems that are there in the systems. But before I start off on this, the first thing that I want to essentially do is that please look at the latest vulnerability of WebP, which essentially we have tracked more than 44 applications and essentially kind of looked at all of those applications and reporting vulnerabilities on those applications which are based on Electron, in addition to basically the browsers and the updates, etc. So we are tracking to the tune of 130 applications that we basically got, which essentially are potentially affected because of the vulnerability. So our team is basically almost updating this particular thing every hour and essentially providing updates in terms of anybody who's providing a fix, you essentially see that in the remediation plan in your system when the scan runs. So this is something that's happening with the current system, and I would urge all of you to kind of look at it because this is currently being exploited. However, it's not very clear as to whether it is being exploited only at the browser level or it is being exploited at the applications level, because all of the applications, including Microsoft Teams, Slack, everything is basically supposed to be susceptible to this because they all use the Electron framework. The challenge that we have with essentially identifying what is impacted and not impacted in this Electron framework is because of the fact that for example, if libwebp was a DLL that we could essentially kind of look at and essentially find its version, and then we could essentially say that you are susceptible, then it would have been straightforward. Unfortunately, it is a statically linked library, which means that unless we essentially dump bin of the entire all executables on the system, we would not know whether a particular application is susceptible or not. So what we are relying on is basically there are lists which are being maintained by the Electron.js coders in terms of all applications that are currently using Electron.js. And we are basically kind of looking at that list as a master list. And we're also getting lists which are coming from other places. And what we are then doing is that we are essentially going back to each of the sites of the applications to figure out whether they have released any new patches or they have not released any new patches. And this is essentially being manually updated in the database because there's no automated way to do this in the database. So our team is basically sitting in 3 shifts. And during these 3 shifts, they're basically checking all these 130, 135 odd applications and essentially updating the database with any new information that is coming through. So with that said, that is as far as the existing system is concerned, and you will basically be seeing these updates in the system. Now, basically coming on to this new system. So
Shiva, just hold that thought. Um, I know that you had upgraded to a bigger Zoom license. There are apparently quite a few folks trying to join, but they're not able to join.
no, it's
Because
upgrade.
it's saying that capacity at 100 and other people are not able to join. Can you please check that? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I can just quickly check that. Just give me a minute.
Shiva, just checking. Are you there?
Yes, I'm just basically checking if there is this thing. So,
Or is it the same link or is it a different link for your Zoom account?
no, it's the same.
Okay.
It shows up to 300 users, but I don't know why it is applying a limit at 100 users.
Yeah, because the number of participants is stuck at 100. It's not increasing. So definitely there's something that's. I hope you're logged in with the correct login.
Yes. I'm just making one setting change. Let's see if that works. If that works,
Okay.
then
Yeah.
just give me 2 minutes. If this doesn't work, we'll basically continue.
It appears to be working now, guys. I see more than 100 coming into the meeting, so maybe just give it a second here. I see 103, 104.
Oh yeah, correct. Great. So I think whatever Shiva you did, it works. So maybe we can continue. And for the folks who came in now, our apologies. I think there was some Zoom issue. We had upgraded to a 300 participant account, but due to some reason it didn't kick in. But glad that everybody else would make it now. Thank you. Over to you, Shiva.
Perfect. So hope you can see my screen, okay?
Yep.
Okay, so what we've essentially done is that this, so basically we had our entire UI in the past, which essentially had the left-hand side menus, we had all of the settings, etc. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through, this is going to be like a two-part exercise where we essentially kind of go through one set of things today and the other basically in the next week, Wednesday's call. But what I'm going to show you is that how we are essentially changing how we are doing everything so that it becomes simpler and basically almost like to the extent that it becomes a no-brainer to essentially kind of attack the problems that are essentially there. Now, here is basically what you get to see. This is an overview. Now, one of the key things that I will essentially point out here is that, one second, let me get this out of the way. Yeah. So one of the things that you will see here is that essentially we have, earlier we used to have two views, one basically which was a global view and one which was a company view. And whenever you shifted between a global and company view, basically the views were completely different. It was a separate menu, all of that stuff. All of that is removed. It's basically made much more simpler. So here is the overview. Now, what is it showing? Basically, first, it's basically telling you how many of your company, what percentage of your companies basically are under the low risk score, what percentage of your company are in critical risk score range, what percentage of your company are in the high risk score range, and how many are in medium risk score range. Now, this is basically an immediate health of how your MSP is running from a cybersecurity practice perspective. Second, overall, what is your risk score across all of your partners? Now, again, this is basically something that you might question, saying that what is the meaning of the risk score? It has to be applied only to my partners. Now, the point is that while you are essentially looking at it from your customer perspective, as a partner who's providing the services, you also run a risk, because if any of them gets breached, then you face the liability. So essentially, this essentially is a measure of your risk score in terms of how well you're doing with respect to all of the partners. And then right over here, what you see over here is basically the different companies that you're essentially managing. What are their asset counts? What is the risk corresponding to each of the verticals? And basically a risk score, basically that's associated with that company. Now, you basically can see this. We essentially categorize anything that is between 70 and 100, basically as very high critical risk. Anything between 50 and 80 is basically kind of medium risk, is high. This is critical, this is high, this is medium, and these are also essentially low risk, basically if it's below 50. So this essentially is kind of the categorization. So you see a complete view of the risk across your entire system, and basically your counts of assets and all of those pieces which are in here, and basically what is contributing to this particular risk. Now, one of the key things is that I can essentially go here and kind of basically click on this, and essentially everything that we do over here is essentially linked up, right? So I basically can get into any of the, look at the assets. Now, I'm looking at all of the assets in this, in a company. Now, okay, just very quickly, like I basically am in global, and then essentially I can switch to any company that I want. Allow it a second to load. This is essentially a so we have the risk score. Now, essentially, I essentially want to look at all the assets. Just going to refresh this. Yep. So basically now I have assets. Now, when I'm looking at these assets, this basically is at a global level, all of the assets that are there, and what basically is the problems with these different assets, these essentially are coming up here. Now, what I can essentially do is I can very quickly filter it. I can essentially choose a particular company, and then I can essentially get down to only the assets that belong to that particular company. And with each asset, you essentially have the associated risk score with that asset. So you can see that this has a risk score of 100. you basically can see how many critical vulnerabilities. And essentially what we have is, what are the CISA notified vulnerabilities that basically this particular asset is carrying? What are the EPS score greater than 95 vulnerabilities that these are carrying? What are the high severity vulnerabilities, and what are the total vulnerabilities that are existing across the system? So all of this basically in this single asset view, you immediately get it, and you can essentially kind of load more assets in the same view. So this gives you an immediate view of what are the assets that you essentially need to attack and basically look at. But we have now, this is basically the traditional asset view. And then basically if I click on this view, you get the asset detail view, which is something that you've been used to basically with the remediation plans with, and basically what we have is also basically what we call as the timeline. So this timeline will essentially cover and basically talk about every change that basically has occurred in this particular asset. And we basically have a full timeline of all the activities that have occurred in this particular asset. And this includes everything, which is basically user login, user logout, people putting in USB, people removing USB. All of that essentially is covered under this particular timeline. But what is more interesting in this whole thing is that when you come down here, essentially we have what is called everything categorized into, and this is a common theme across all of the things that we do, right? So we have basically what is called problem groups. So we have identified a set of problem groups that belong to a particular asset. Now, what are the different problems that can occur with an asset? So here is essentially these, there are CISA notified vulnerabilities on this particular asset. There is vulnerabilities which are basically greater than 0.95. Then there are vulnerabilities which have an EPSS between 0.95 and 0.9, right? And then there are critical vulnerabilities that basically are notified based on CVSS scores, high severity vulnerabilities, medium severity vulnerabilities. Then we are talking about vulnerabilities like database vulnerabilities, the SMB vulnerabilities, SSL TLS, all of this, and yeah, including things like antivirus is not installed, backup is not performed, firewall misconfiguration, any remote access vulnerabilities in terms of this thing, and then any low severity vulnerabilities, all of that. And do we see any running services which are not supposed to be running? Is there any information disclosure that's happening? So all of these are basically the different problem groups. And what you see here is basically a count of the problems that are occurring on this particular asset. So when I click on this number, it basically loads up that particular problem and the particular thing, and I can essentially look at the details of what is that particular problem, and this will take me to what is the problem over there. So this essentially is a view where you basically can look at the complete details of the assets. Now, with the particular asset, you also have the ability to look at what are the installed patches, what is the installed software. Now, these are things that you're already used to in the current scenario. So you can essentially, it's the same thing, which is you can look at what software is installed, who's the publisher, what are the critical vulnerabilities, what is the vulnerability, all of that stuff basically, which you're used to. So this is basically kind of, we've carried over from what we have right now in terms of what is the storage devices, is it encrypted, not encrypted, BIOS information, firewall policies, all of that stuff is basically brought in back here. Now, once we basically say toggle view, I basically am back here. Now, one of the most critical views, which I believe that is the view that everybody basically must be looking at, is essentially get to this problems view. So when you get to this problems view, what it does is basically breaks it down across assets. Now here, essentially, when I'm here at the company level, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly switch to global level. Now, when I switch to global level, what you would notice is that this problem group, this same user interface, nothing changed. The only thing that essentially changed is that we have 3 columns instead of 2 columns. Now, what does this tell me? So this is basically the problem groups that we have. And this is what we discussed right now. We essentially have bucketized all of the problems that take place into these problem groups, right? So this includes things like network vulnerabilities, database vulnerabilities, etc. So for example, let's click here. I have SSL TLS vulnerabilities. Now, if you really look at it, this is basically SSL weak ciphers. This is Suite 32 TLS v1.2. So if you remember in the last, in the older version of our product, what we did was we essentially kept this as network vulnerabilities, and basically kind of we had a separate list for normal CV based vulnerabilities. Now, basically all of this is integrated into one scheme, and it is all categorized into these different problem groups. So essentially, when you look at these different problem groups, the reason we categorize this into different problem groups is because you can essentially have assignments to people based on these problem groups or categories and basically ask them to fix these problems. And this is something that I will show you in the next this thing, where this entire problem group, we are essentially flowing it down so that you can essentially, when you create tickets in, say, your PSA, you can essentially say, oh, I basically want to create tickets on this board and assign it to this specific user if it is basically belongs to this particular problem group. So that way, what happens is that you can essentially kind of automate the entire process of assignment of the tickets that get created from this particular system. Again, if you remember in the past, what we basically had was that we basically primarily were talking about remediation plans and basically fixing things based on remediation plans, and that will essentially continue. Now, what you see over here is that I basically have said, okay, what are the problems? Now I clicked on, if I click on this, I get the list of problems that are there. And these are basically the list of CVEs. I get the EPSS score, I get all of the details, and then I get how many assets across how many companies basically have this particular problem over here also, right? Now, the second view that I can essentially do is I click on this company count. Now, this company count basically immediately shows me which company, how many assets, and how many problems with those assets basically are basically there. So this essentially kind of gives me a full navigation into how to basically get to a specific company. Now, if I click on the asset count over here, what it does is basically it shows me the assets which are there and essentially what are the details. And then when I click on the particular asset, I will be navigated to the detailed view of that particular asset. So it kind of gives you a single pane of glass where you can essentially kind of navigate between these different views without having to essentially kind of understand or where you have to go. Everything is basically linked up. So I can basically go through any of this and basically understand all the problems that are there in my network. Now, when we talk of problems, we then have to talk about how do we fix it, right? So this essentially is a remediation plan, and the remediation plan is something that all of you are basically fully aware of. So this is basically all of the remediations that are there. Now, in the remediations, as usual, we basically have all the products and updates and all of that stuff. So basically it talks about how to update all of these pieces together. Now, what I'm going to what I'm basically, so here you can essentially see that what is the fix, and then what are basically the companies, and what are basically the affected assets. This entire thing is basically out here. So you can essentially kind of look at it, and you can essentially see that all of these vulnerabilities, what is to be installed, how many assets basically has it got to be installed, what are the affected assets. You click on the affected assets, you basically get the view of all the assets that are basically impacted because of this, right in this page. So everything is inline and basically brought to you right over there so that you can essentially kind of operate on it from a single place. So now basically I'm just going to quickly toggle this view. Once we basically have this, now I can basically get into, like, I want to look at what are the application vulnerabilities separately. I can look at application vulnerabilities over here and basically kind of get the complete view. And this is pending OS patches. So this is something that people constantly talk about, right? Like, I want to essentially see how long, like all the patches that are pending from an OS perspective. And this you can do at a global level. So you can essentially see like how many assets basically are backed up in terms of the number of patches. And again, you can do this by company and you can do this at a global level. So basically at a company level, you can essentially see on a per company basis, how many of them are basically pending. All of those views essentially you can see. Now, the next basically thing which I want to talk about very briefly is the ports. So in the past, essentially when we represented ports, we essentially kind of hid the ports into a specific view over there. So just allowing it to load over here for a minute. Okay, we'll get back to that. Basically, okay. And then this is essentially, again, when you look at vulnerabilities, they again a view basically which shows you everything from a problem group view and basically bringing it down to what are all the problems that are over there and how basically to solve this particular problem. So this essentially is the same view. So vulnerabilities basically is no different from what we are essentially doing over there. Now, again, when you go into Active Directory, one of the things that we were doing earlier, whether it was with Azure Active Directory or the normal Active Directory, the biggest problem was that we would essentially kind of say, okay, here are the things that you have, and basically it was left to your inference saying that, and basically we had reports on certain pieces of this. Now, what we have is basically we have classified all of the Active Directory problems into specific problem groups. And there are more problem groups that are getting created on a daily basis, which essentially talks about what are all the problems that are there. And again, how many companies are there? And when I basically click on a particular company, I can essentially see, for example, here, what is the domain, what is the email address, and then basically what is the display name. I can see all of those details and I can see which company it belongs to. And I can see what is the problem with that particular users. So the users are also basically put in the same section. So in Active Directory, again, we basically have moved away from basically trying to just show details of all the users, etc., because those are details that you can get anyway, basically from our reports, etc. But basically showing you again the entire thing from a problem group perspective and allowing you to navigate to look at basically all the things from a company perspective, a company count, and basically a problem count perspective. That essentially is the entire way in which this is essentially transitioning. Now, going back to one of the things that we do, so this is essentially very good, but how do we essentially configure this? How do we do this, right? So one of the things is that you will notice that there are no basically menus which say this settings, that settings, etc. So let me start with basically a couple of things. The first thing that I want to essentially kind of talk about is, okay, we basically talk about user management. Now, the new user management basically is, it's a new system. One of the things that a lot of you would have experienced in the past is basically during logins, etc., there are problems and basically, etc., navigation. Now we basically have integrated with a brand new system, and this system essentially allows us to give you full control over this authentication system. Yeah.
Yeah, was there a question?
Good. I'm sorry. Did not mean that.
Okay, no problem. So now that we have taken a break, Shiva, can I just pause quickly and take a few questions?
Sure.
Okay, one was from Mark saying, please have the page remember how many assets you want to see, so that it's the default low number is not what is seen, and you can keep, supposing you say I want to see many 50 assets in a page, for example, then you'll see 50. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's possible. Is Vrishali on the call?
Yes, sir, I've already noted it down.
Okay, great.
Note it down. Yeah, thanks.
Likewise, are the integrations from Luke? The next question, are the integrations in V2 and V3 the same?
Can you repeat that, Srikanth?
Are the integrations that are available in V2 and V3 the same?
Yeah, in fact, we have more integrations in V3.
Awesome. So Luke, to your question, we have more, and we will share details of the additional newer integrations shortly. Patrick has a question: is there an easy way to see what updates KnXSecure can update?
So, what updates KnXSecure can update in the sense?
Yeah,
Patrick?
it's from the remediation plan screen, and the V2, there's a little flashing icon that lets you push updates.
The chocolatey updates.
Yeah, I just didn't see that icon when you were going through the remediation plan for V3. I just want to know where that is.
Right. So the point is that in V3, basically the patching engine is basically undergoing a rehaul, and I will kind of shortly explain to you why it's undergoing a rehaul. And basically, once that gets integrated, you will essentially see what are the things that will be that can be pushed by the system, and I will actually go through that very shortly.
Thank you.
Anything else, Srikanth?
Yeah, Brandon has a question: when will this version 3 be released?
So as you were seeing that this basically is right now undergoing QA and testing basically, but we are basically going to take it to the set of customer folks who basically sent us requests saying that they will be the initial partners on V3. So for their data, the migration is basically going to happen on October 8th. We're going to migrate it and then 2 days of testing, so till 10th, and hand it off to them. And then post that, once we basically see for 1 week, we'll get feedback from those folks who initially use it, and then we'll basically start migrating everyone. So that's the plan. And as I said, next week, basically Ryan on my team is essentially going to be focused on finishing up the documentation and writing up all of those pieces so that when everybody comes in to use the system, they have all the notes and this thing. Anything else? Okay, let's look at the questions. Okay.
Are all the features between V3 and V2 the same? I think that's a question. And there are some issues in search in V2, like special characters appearing. So, I think that's one question. Are all the features between V2 and V3 the same? I think is a prime question.
So you don't lose any features from V2 when you come to V3, but you get additional features, as I said, basically the whole UI paradigm changes, etc. But so you get additional features in V3.
Okay, great. Couple of quick last questions. One is from Mark again. Is the Active Directory view, is Azure AD also listed there, or does it have its own page? Because in your UI, it only showed Azure. I'm sorry, it's only Active Directory. I think that's where the question is coming from.
No, so we treat in this current one, we are going to be treating Azure AD and AD as the same. The only additional tab that will essentially come is for basically, it's a new tab which is called Cloud, which I'll talk about in next Wednesday's this thing. And the Cloud tab will essentially talk about other pieces, compliance of Office 365, email, etc. So that is where essentially that will be.
Great. Joe has a question reviewing the patching process and any links to the API docs.
So the links to the API docs will be made available once we basically have a full GA release of this, which, as I said, will basically be in 3 weeks from now. These APIs have undergone a significant change. We are also working towards basically giving backward compatibility to the new system from the old APIs. But we'll basically update you on that basically within the next 3 weeks.
Awesome. I think the last question also probably, the API answer that you just gave should hopefully fix that. All right, we can continue. Sorry about that.
Perfect. So one of the things basically that essentially you have the capability to with this new system is basically you can essentially create your users and kind of give them roles within your organization. And basically what we basically have is a concept of a project. And then you essentially have different roles in a project. So what we have done is we've essentially kind of created the project that we basically require in order to basically give you access to various systems. And so what you can see is you can basically see the roles, you can see the grants, and you can basically see the authorizations over here. Users basically can belong to multiple roles. One of the things that we are changing in this particular system is that the roles that you belong to are basically fixed. So in the earlier case, I would like to basically talk about this in terms of what we used to have in the earlier case was that we used to essentially say that you could create your own custom role. And now creating a custom role is very difficult because you had hundreds of actions which was out there. And each of those actions basically had to be manually, basically you had to check off or check on those particular action items. And that basically was a little bit of pain. And I actually noticed that a lot of people are not using it. So what we are doing right now is that we are basically creating a set of standard roles. Now, what are the standard roles? These standard roles are nothing but things like vulnerability administrator, vulnerability reader, compliance administrator, compliance reader. Then you have Active Directory administrator, Active Directory reader. So for each of the sections that you basically have, you have ability to have read and write access. Now you can decide a person can basically have one or more roles in this whole thing. So he basically can have, you can just give him access to asset reader and vulnerability reader, in which case he gets access only to those two menus, and he doesn't get access to compliance or Active Directory of any of those pieces. So this way, what we are doing is that we are reducing the friction in terms of how to basically give different roles to different users and how to relegate them to specific domains. That essentially is being done over here. The next thing is that basically if you go in here, one of the things that you can essentially do is this basically gives you complete flexibility in terms of how you want to set up your login, how your MFA, all of that stuff basically is right here. So you don't need to essentially look at doing this. Second, you can integrate with all of the identity providers that are here. So this essentially gives you a complete identity providers which you can integrate with. So you're no longer basically kind of tied down to some of the identity providers that we have. You can define your own password complexity regime that you want to essentially enforce over here. You can set up what is the lockout policy that you want to essentially set up in case basically people are accessing it. And then you could essentially change the complete branding. So basically, how does the login page look like? So this is essentially how you are basically going to look like. So you can essentially change this. You can change it to your colors, etc. You can change what are the message texts, which basically have to be displayed in different places. You can change what is the login interface text. You can essentially change it. And you can basically also change the language over here. So all of this essentially is made available to all of you so that you can essentially use this as a complete authentication system. You can, technically speaking, since this is essentially, very simply speaking, what we're giving you access to is the equivalent of what any of the authentication systems do, like basically OneLogin or anybody does, right? So we are essentially giving you the equivalent of one such system. It is possible for you to basically integrate your applications to these systems, and all you have to do is to basically create a new project and basically integrate it into it. But again, that is something that you can choose to do. But we are basically providing this as a feature. Underlying this whole thing, the technology that basically we are using is a component which is called Zitadel. It is called Zitadel, if anybody wants to go and look up this whole thing. So Zitadel, basically we've contributed to it, and we're basically working along with these folks. So essentially, the reason we chose this is for two reasons, right? When we basically had in the last one, we essentially used this component called Keycloak. Now, Keycloak had one major flaw, which is basically that when we had a large number of tenants, it basically kind of hogged memory and basically was not very performant. And we did have problems, for example, when we had multiple times when there were login failures, etc., which were occurring, which was primarily because it is based out on Java. And in Java, basically, when the garbage collector basically does not run efficiently enough, you get into problems. This, on the other hand, is essentially written completely in Golang and is basically memory optimized, and basically has a capacity to handle a large number of users. And we basically stress tested this. And that is the reason we're essentially bringing this back to the community, saying that, yeah, this is basically a good thing. Now, while we can use it transparently inside, we're exposing the complete interface to all of you, because you can essentially make the changes. And a lot of you have asked us in the past saying that I want to change how the login page looks like. I want to change how basically people access the system. This will allow you to essentially kind of make those changes, change the appearances, integrate with any of the IDPs that you have, and all of that without basically kind of bothering about essentially when will this upgrade come or that upgrade come. So this essentially is what we are doing from an authentication perspective. Now, if you go back to our UI, you can essentially, if you want to look at your profile, basically you click here, and then basically you get to your specific profile. And then once you get to your specific profile, you can make changes to what anything that you want in your profile. So that essentially is there. So you can see here. So this is basically all the profile changes. You can change your name, you can change your display name, you can change this thing. You can define your phone number and all of that stuff, and essentially define what rules of password and security in terms of what authentications, what are the authorizations which are there. All of that stuff can essentially be looked at. You cannot modify the authorizations because we essentially kind of lock it down in terms of what authorizations we will give you, because you cannot have global access to the entire tenant. So you have access to your organization and whatever happens within your organization. Okay, so that's basically as far as that is concerned. So that takes that out of place. Now, the next thing is that one of the things that we essentially kind of learned through the process of this thing is that when we basically looked at the old UI, one of the things was that people found it difficult to find things in different places. So one of the things that we've done right now is that all of the actions that you basically require are all basically part of this right-hand menu. So basically, when you want to create a new company, you just basically come here and create a new company. You want to essentially delete a company, you can come and delete companies here. You want to import companies, you can import companies here. You can basically look at all the integrations that are there right over here. So you can see, like, for example, we've added a lot of integrations over here. So you can essentially go through all of these integrations here. So you can set up all the integrations right over here, right? So, and then you want to basically kind of now, very quickly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into what we call as the dashboards, right? So I want to see my dashboards. So again, you can essentially see your dashboard view. Now, there are two things which this thing. So this is essentially because I'm an admin of this system, I essentially get to this view. If you're not an admin to the system, you will essentially not get into this view. You will essentially get into view where you will have to select the dashboards and you will view the dashboards. Now, the dashboards themselves, again, as I spoke to you last time, we essentially have built a complete dashboarding system, which essentially allows you to kind of create dashboards, share the dashboards, all of that from a single pane of glass. Now, here is basically a set of dashboards that we have created. And just to basically kind of demonstrate how, what are the different things that can be done with the dashboard, we basically have created something which is called a kitchen sink dashboard, which is what all of the vendors do. So here, basically, we added multiple data sources, and then we are essentially showing you like what are the different types of, how you can basically kind of create different widgets and basically kind of put them together and create a dashboard of your own. Now, you can basically see that all of this, you can basically create widgets, which essentially you can have create filters, which basically change the data for all of the systems. You can basically create filters, which are things like categories. You can essentially create number widgets. You can basically create these kinds of gauges, graphs, all of this essentially right over here, and including things like maps, etc. You can essentially create. Now, when you basically click on edit on any of this, you basically have a dashboard designer, okay? And then you basically kind of have all these widgets that you have here. So we have all of these widgets, which basically we have created, basically radar polar charts, basically maps. You can basically put text, you can put images, you can combine widgets, you can put a tab. You basically have range filters. You have, so we can essentially kind of, you can do a lot of things with this particular set of views, and we'll be publishing. So I think we're going to basically do one specific session where we'll talk about how to create dashboards and how to essentially create interesting dashboards. And this is where essentially we are creating dashboards that are all talking about only one thing, right? The one thing that was essentially missing in the previous version of the product, which is what are the trends? So what was my status 6 months ago, either from a risk score perspective or from a vulnerability perspective, and how am I doing today? So the complete trend for 6 months, 12 months, etc., is what we are essentially kind of building multiple dashboards for. So this essentially is kind of the dashboard. So I'm just going to show you a few sample dashboards that we are essentially kind of building out. So one of the things that you all know basically is the assessment report. So I'm just going to open the assessment report. So this is the a sample assessment report that we've created, which basically takes everything at the MSP level and kind of basically puts it out there. And this is something that you can take and then kind of like, so this basically is a vulnerability summary. What is the problem group, the company count, problem count, groups by assets, all of this. What are the top 5 remediation plans? What is the remediation summary? What are the pending OS patches? What are Active Directory details in terms of what are the problems? So what is the AD summary? So all of this essentially can be created. And again, the most important thing and the most thing we are most excited about the fact is that all of this is basically something that you can essentially kind of drive and control. And also basically you can essentially give us comments on these dashboards right from here. And once you give these comments, we basically can make changes to those dashboards as you require, or you could make those changes yourself. Okay. Second, when you make these dashboards, you can basically export these dashboards. You can basically export it to a PDF. And then when you export it to a PDF, one of the things that we've actually done is given you the ability to define what in this report you want to basically kind of put into the PDF or what you don't want to put in the PDF. Or you could basically export the whole dashboard itself, and then you can define the orientation, and then you basically can export it, and then it will essentially create the report and then give it back to you. So this essentially is kind of the complete experience of what you have with the new dashboards. So we had a lot of limitations with the existing Elasticsearch dashboards that we had in the last time. They were pretty good, but they also had basically their own limitations in terms of what it could do. But that's not all. Okay, so the second one is basically schedules, right? So again, going back to the topic that I was telling. So if you have a dashboard and you want to schedule it, earlier we basically used to have one scheduler page where you came and chose your scheduler category and did all of that stuff. No, we are here basically going to give you the scheduler right in the reporting and dashboarding component so that you can essentially define your own schedule. So you can essentially say what dashboards you want to schedule at what time. You can basically select the category. You can select the dashboards. You can basically say, I say problem vulnerabilities, and basically I want to, what is the schedule name? And this is interesting. That is basically you want alerts on the data, saying that I want to basically, if the value of number of vulnerabilities increases more than a particular value, then essentially alert me, send me an email notification, right? So these are essentially things that you can essentially do with this scheduler. So we have given you the complete capability to essentially kind of schedule out these reports and send it to whomever you want to send it to. The other thing that we essentially added, and this was something that we added just today, is essentially the concept of what we are calling as slideshows. Now, what the slideshow essentially means is that you basically have dashboards, right? Now, what you can essentially do with these dashboards is you can essentially say that I want to create a slideshow of this. What will be the duration of this slideshow? And what are the dashboards that I want to add into this slideshow? Okay. And so basically, for example, I can just say add dashboard. It will ask me what is the category. And then I can essentially kind of choose the dashboard which I want to add. And once I add that particular dashboard, it basically gets added over here. Now, once I create this slideshow, what is the thing that I can do with this slideshow? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, get a link, right? So I get a link to this dashboard, to this slideshow. Now, let me show you what happens when basically I put this link. So assume that this is basically on a television in your location. Now, what this allows you to do is, so watch what happens after basically, because what we've said is we've said every 10 seconds, the dashboard should change, right? So let's wait for 10 seconds. And then you can see that basically it is traversing through the different dashboards and basically presenting it as a slideshow. And the beauty of this is all real-time data. So essentially all the data that is changing and everything is essentially kind of getting displayed. So this essentially can be used as a display that you can put up in any location. A lot of BI tools offer this today, but what I wanted to do is to kind of create a platform where we can essentially give all these features to you as part of basically what we are providing at this particular case. So that basically takes care of, that is basically the piece which we talked about, which is the slideshows. We are still working on this thing called pinboards. I'll basically come to this later. And we basically want to also capture what is called usage analytics. So, and this is something that I want feedback on. This is something that we've been kind of debating. One of the things that a lot of times that people, especially US MSPs, have come back to us and told us is that, oh, I sent these things to the customer, but basically I don't know whether he saw it or he didn't see it. And we really don't know whether they're interested, not interested, etc. Right? So this will give us complete analytics in terms of whether how many people used it, who are the people who used it, all of that basically is kind of, because we have markers which are in there. Very similar to how basically Google tracks, where you track people coming to a website or basically leaving a website, the same kind of stuff basically is in place over here. So as I said, you can basically create your own categories. You can essentially kind of put things. We have a predefined set of categories. You can add your own categories. You can add your own dashboards. You can share the dashboards. And how do you share the dashboard? So let's go to that particular piece, right? So now the next thing is that how do I basically share this dashboard? I don't want to share the access to the system. I want a dashboard. So here, basically, we basically implemented the same thing that you would do with things like Google, etc. Right? So you can create dashboards which are purely private, which means that they have to come into this platform in order to essentially get it. You could essentially get what is called an embed code. Now, what this embed code allows you to do is to basically kind of put this up in your own website if you would choose to, because you may want the customer to come to your website and then basically look at this particular report. And you can essentially choose whether he can, whoever basically has access to this, can they edit it or can they view it? Can they provide dashboard comments? Can they provide comments on a specific widget? Do we track them for the number of views that they have there? Can they perform an export and basically use SSO is basically anyway, like in case you're sending it to a customer, will they basically be part of our system or basically will they just come in unauthenticated? This essentially does this. So you can essentially embed this back into your website, right? So that allows you to embed it in your website. The other thing that you can essentially do is that you can essentially make this public, okay? Make it public. And then you can also basically unlist this dashboard from this current listing. So people will not see this particular dashboard if you don't want them to see it. When you make it public and then you essentially share this particular link, right? Now, what happens is that I can essentially go send this link over to anyone. And this link essentially will kind of open up this dashboard and they can have complete view of this particular dashboard. So this basically allows them to, it's kind of a public view, and people who have access to access to this URL will be able to see it. Now, if you basically don't want them to have access to it without a username password, absolutely, you can essentially make it a private dashboard and then basically use that as a mechanism to deliver this over there. Okay, so that is basically how you can share data between these pieces. And then of course, you can essentially kind of download this. You can download this in PDF, etc. And then you have version history of all of this. You can basically set up all of that stuff. So this is basically all the actions that we basically have on this. So this is essentially the complete dashboarding component. As you can see, basically we have a whole bunch of almost like 60 dashboards that we are publishing into the system. And you can essentially create your own dashboards. You can bring, so we are basically open to you bringing your own data sources, because in case you want to combine data from multiple data sources, you can essentially bring this in over here. So as you can see, we are basically publishing a whole bunch of data sets which basically come from our system directly into this system. So the way that this is built is that we have now separated out the reporting component from our core database component. And to just give you guys a little bit of preview into why we are doing all of this stuff, the current system that we have, we know that it can essentially scale up to 3,000 to 5,000 partners, but essentially it does not have the wherewithal to essentially go beyond that. What we are designing right now basically is something that we are designing for, even if we get to 50,000 or 100,000 partners, we will be able to take care of it. And so in order to do that, we have to basically do separation of functions. And one of the key functions is basically reporting, because the beginning of the month, everybody wants the reports. They want to essentially send it out to people. And again, we want to essentially give you the mechanism by which you can pull other data into it and essentially kind of present it as a single report. So this essentially gives you this particular view of with a single report. and work with us to see if you want us to pull data from some other pieces. So for example, one of the things that we were thinking is we should essentially pull data from your PSA and essentially correlate it with the tickets that were essentially raised by this system versus closure rates. Those essentially can be done, and looking at your billing because of this particular piece. So these are kind of interesting dashboards that we could build that could help you basically look at how you're monetizing your investment in your security products. Second, it also could help you to figure out, for example, if there are a lot of tickets which are just open. So basically, the efficiency of your technical staff in order to be able to close things is basically out there. So this basically is the complete dashboard. So now let me basically quickly go back to our UI and then essentially kind of, I just want to cover one more thing over there. So I'm just going to refresh the screen once because I think. So this is the remediation plan, and have gone through this. I just wanted to very quickly show you something that. Okay, here I have it here. Now, one of the things that we basically have done in the past is essentially talk to you about how you can fix your how things can be fixed in terms of your upgrading your this thing, which is basically third-party patches and all of that stuff that we could do. What we didn't basically take care of is things like when you have a problem with your server, like say, for example, you're running Apache or Nginx or one of those, and basically we discover a network vulnerability. Now, the point is that we have to essentially kind of say, yeah, there is a network vulnerability. Now, the question that you will come up with is like, so what do I do about it, right? Now, we basically went through the entire process of saying, what is it that we need to do for this particular case? And what we've done now is that what you have is basically the ability to basically kind of get a remediation script from us. Now, this remediation script basically shows you so it basically gives you a download of a remediation script, which basically is either a PowerShell script or basically a Linux-based shell script, which will essentially give you what exactly is what you need to run on that particular system in order to fix this, right? So we basically created this complete set of scripts, which would essentially kind of do this for you. So that way, what will happen is that in the stage one, we will essentially be giving you these scripts, which you can then copy and paste to your RMM system and basically run those scripts and basically remediate the network vulnerabilities. But in phase two, you will essentially be able to use the patching agent that we are basically providing to essentially kind of patch those systems automatically using the scripts that we basically have provided to you. So this is basically something that we have kind of added into the system right now. And this is essentially kind of one of the key differentiators that we have from the older version, which is all of your network vulnerabilities are also basically going to be patchable. And basically, we are going to be able to work on those patches. Now, one of the last things that I want to cover today is also basically what we are calling as reporting. So what is it that we are talking about in terms of reporting? Now, what you saw was dashboards. Now, you want to essentially kind of have reports, which is basically saying that what are I need to essentially see reports, right? So we have reports which are in place. Now these reports basically will, so for example, if we have a remediation plan report over here. Now a remediation plan report basically talks about all the remediations and all of those pieces. So all of the data sets that were available in basically the dashboards are now available in the reports also. And the reporting framework again has been separated out so that you can essentially kind of see the reports basically in, you can essentially edit the reports and view the reports right from within here, create your own set of reports, and basically take these reports and basically share it with your customers. So it just takes a second to load, and then I will basically kind of, yeah. So essentially you can design your reports, you can then preview your reports and basically kind of this thing. So this is kind of what the reports that we've created, which is basically the remediation report. Again, with this particular thing, you have the ability to essentially kind of put in all of the controls, basically. So all of the controls that you saw on the dashboard designer essentially are also available over here. So you can essentially kind of go in. So for example, this is basically a remediation summary. So this is basically the template of the remediation summary, where we are basically taking a particular data source and saying these are the things that essentially we have to do. When I click on preview, I can actually see the complete report delivered for a particular customer, which basically we can look at. So while this renders, just wanted to quickly point out that you have, so here you can see the summary report. It basically has pulled all the data from the thing and pulled it together. Now you have the ability to export this into PDF. You could export this into Excel. You could export this into Word, PowerPoint, or any of the others. So if you want it to be machine consumable, you can also take it into XML formats. So the complete data is exportable in these formats. You can print it. You can basically kind of export it. You can then basically set up, you can have a page setup. You can essentially say, how do I want the page to be set up? So whether it's going to be A4, A3, or you want to basically make it portrait, whatever it is, you can essentially set up this whole thing. And basically you can navigate between these different pages of data that is in there and basically see all of the data that is out there, right? And so these, and this report, again, you can basically publish this report. You can essentially then go back and you can essentially share this report. Again, the same set of sharing options. You can make it public. You can essentially make it private. So all of that essentially is available. So you can essentially also kind of take this report and embed it in your web page and basically kind of send it out to people. So the overall thing is that if you look at our dashboarding and our reporting, it essentially created like two parallels, which allows us to essentially kind of allows you to essentially kind of extend both of these frameworks to use any data sources, bring in data, and then create more comprehensive reports and dashboards. So that's basically the entire idea of this reporting framework. Again, the schedules are right here. So the one was basically the scheduling the dashboard. This essentially is scheduling the reports. So if you want to basically create a month-end schedule saying that on the 29th of the month, I want to essentially send out these reports, you can essentially set up the schedules and basically export them at your leisure. Okay. So this essentially is the reporting toolkit that we have. So what we've basically kind of covered today is essentially the complete set of where we basically started from saying that we are taking a more risk-centric view of the entire system. We are talking about risk score everywhere, whether it is from an asset, whether it's from Active Directory. We are looking at it from a problem solution perspective. We have the entire dashboarding toolkit available for you to essentially kind of create your own dashboards, and we will publish the dashboards that we already have in the system into it, and you can modify those dashboards. And last but not the least, we have the ability to create very professional reports. And that was one of the complaints that a lot of people had in terms of our graphics, and our tables are looking very 1990-ish. And now basically, hopefully with these new improvements, you will essentially get something which is good for 2023 and at least the next 3 years going forward, because of course technology and preferences change. So with that particular piece. So with this, what I'll do is that I will basically pause for today. And what we're going to basically be covering in the next meeting on Wednesday is the entire compliance piece, because it requires its own one session because the entire way in which we're doing compliance is right now changing. I have already talked to you about the fact that we've built a complete compliance master, which basically is a set of almost 800 to 900 different checks that basically are performed on a system. And we are overlaying the standards on top of it. So how we are reporting on those standards. And the second is that one of the things that we were not doing earlier is that we were just reporting on certain controls and we were not essentially considering what is the entirety of a particular standard. Right now, you will essentially see the entirety of the standard and you'll be able to see what is manual and what is automated. The automated is populated. The manual is something that you can essentially kind of intervene and upload into the system. That entire thing I'll walk you through in the next thing. And also with the entire Office 365 and those pieces. But the takeaway from this, which my request is, if you have any comments about what you saw today, etc., give us feedback because this is something that we've kind of gone through multiple phases in terms of trying to build this through, basically walking through. So even things like essentially when we talk about a company, right? We have a company basically has a page where you can essentially see a complete timeline of that particular company, where you can see when assets are added, assets are removed, and all of those pieces too. So this is basically what I kind of wanted to cover today. And we will essentially kind of come back on next Wednesday, where we will essentially kind of go through the compliance piece and then walk through this entire thing. Now, as I said, October 8th, we will basically upgrade the customers who basically have asked for early access. We will be upgrading their instances and pulling data from their current instances. And basically, we'll be seeking active feedback from you on how you're looking at the new system. And post that within a week or two, based on the feedback, etc., and how well it is received, we will essentially make the required changes and then roll it out to the larger population.
So that's great, Shiva. Thank you. There are a few questions. I think we'll quickly take that up now. There was one that was missed out earlier from Brian on how will the migration work, and particularly for self-hosted.
For self-hosted, basically, we will be taking all of the self-hosted instances. We will be asking them for SSH access, and we will essentially be running a script which will essentially do the migration. So preferably over a weekend, it has to be done. Else, if they basically are willing to give us access to the system over a weekend, then basically we can do an in-place upgrade and basically kind of get them into that system.
Okay, so hopefully that answers your question, Brian. Moving on, Mark has a question: will it be possible to white label per customer? The customer wants to log in and view their assets, so present their customer logo for their login and not the MSP logo.
In the login page itself?
Yeah, Mark, do you want to come up and kind of explain that, please?
Specifically talking about like their environment, you present them a login so they can go look at all their assets. We want it to look like their name, like they give them ownership. They come in, they don't see my company's logo, they see theirs, that warm fuzzy you pass on to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'll basically investigate that and get that mark, because we right now did the white label at the partner level, but what you're saying makes sense. So if we add the white label at the customer level, then I think we can do that. Let me just investigate and I'll get back to you in the next 2 days.
Thank you very much.
Santosh has a question: can we use this application for PIM, Privilege Identity Management?
No, this is not a PIM system.
It's not a PIM system. That's what I thought, because okay, going on. Will the V2 to V3 happen without having to reconfigure or any significant amount of settings?
Yeah, whatever are your current settings, those will basically bring into the V3 system. And for whatever items that were not existing in the existing system, we would essentially take a reasonable defaults and basically put it over there, and that you can change.
Okay. Again, Mark has another question: is there an ability to deprecate a link that you shared as public? That is a time frame. Is that a yes, Shiva?
Yes, and you can essentially say till what time you want that link to be available. That's also there.
Yeah. And Mark has a question: I assume you're required to be logged in to see the slideshow Is that correct? Or
No, you can make the slideshow public or you can make it private. If you make the slideshow public, then you don't need to be logged in. If it's basically private, yes, you need to be logged in.
okay. Shansen, it was stated that the partners who requested early access to V3 would be rolled over on October 8th with 2 days of testing. Would the partners have access to V3 on the 8th or 10th?
10th.
10th. Okay, great. Shansen, hopefully that answered your question. Another question, is it possible to create a Delta report? So 3 months ago, there's a vulnerability carried out on a customer and a report was produced. And today you do another analysis and another report is produced. By selecting these 2 dates, is it possible to produce a Delta, report is, I think, where the spirit of the question.
It is possible. I know this Delta report. And in fact, Vrishali, can you notice down in the next call, I will actually go through the process of creating a Delta report.
So hopefully, Gabriela, that should have answered your question. Simon has a question. Great work, Shiva and team. So yeah, I'm wondering, have there been any improvements, enhancements to the scanning agents and engines? I'm still using Nessus for some customers, particularly external scanning isn't quite right yet. Okay.
So we basically have made significant number of changes to the scanning, especially the external scans are basically cover a lot more than what it was basically covering in V2. And basically the methodology of scanning is also changing. So essentially, yes, the agent is kind of completely different. It is basically more, it has more checks. It has more this thing. So what I would suggest, Simon, is that what we can do is let's basically do a bake-off between the new agent that we release and whatever you're seeing with Nessus. And I think we should be able to kind of see very clearly that we cover all of the things that are in there.
Awesome. Matt has a question. Will the agent process name change from CyberCNS agent V2 to V3? Because they have deployment and monitoring policies configured based on this name.
So we understood that this is going to be a problem, not only with this thing. If you change the name of the agent, we change this thing, etc. Yeah, everybody has gone through a whitelisting process, and so basically upgrading it is not going to be easy. So what we are doing is that the existing agent, if you're running an existing agent, which is the CyberCNS agent V2, right? So we are making that agent run the new agent. So basically, you don't essentially see, you don't have basically all of these EDRs spinning off alarms, etc. Now, when you download the new agent that we essentially provide in the portal, that essentially will have a new name, and that is essentially going to be Connect Secure. So essentially, that will be a Connect Secure agent, and we will basically work with the different folks to whitelist it. But if you have an existing installation, those installations, what we are doing is that we are using the same agent. We are writing a shell, which essentially upgrades that agent to basically launch the new agent in process and basically run the code. So that way, what happens is that all the policies that you have set up, you don't need to basically kind of work through it once again.
Okay. Dennis is saying that it's great, and but you're still using Qualys for external scans and would love to see better parity. And I think, Shiva, you answered this question earlier for Nessus as well, that our external scan will be definitely on par. Okay.
Yep.
Joe, will we have to push new agents, more than one?
No, it will automatically upgrade, and you don't need to push anything.
Luke wants to know how can he be added to early access?
Yeah, Luke, just send a mail to Vrishali. She will take care of it.
I'm just putting her email for everybody. So yeah. Okay, for the local instance, will the customer eventually be to run the conversion themselves? That's a question from Shansen. Shansen, I'm not quite sure I understood. Shiva, did you understand the question?
Yeah, so in case they don't want to give us access, yes, we'll give them the thing to do the upgrade, but it is better that it's an attended upgrade because it's a question of data. But if you want to run it yourself, you can of course run it yourself.
And Bijesh has a question. Does that mean that we'll have two agents running?
No, you won't have two agents running. That's what I said. The way that we essentially do it is that if you already have the Cyber CNS agent V2, it basically loads this new agent and runs it in process and basically shuts off the older data that it was sending. In fact, it will continue to send the old data because, as I told you before, we are basically going to run it two-pronged. That is, you're going to have access to the old portal and the new portal till we are foreseeing till the end of the year. We'll basically be providing that access. So that everybody has a comfortable time in terms of transitioning and getting to this new system. Once basically the new system, once we have the end of the year, we will switch it off and basically you will be completely on the new system.
Okay, so I think we are all caught up. So I think Shiva and engineering team, as in you can take a bow, as in this has been brilliant. So yeah, so thanks everyone for your time. Appreciate you all joining the call, and look forward to having you all join again next Wednesday for the new updates that Shiva has. Shiva, any closing comments?
No, I just wanted to say that please send us review comments, because as we're basically kind of putting this platform out, we want to essentially make this more valuable. And basically a lot of this is basically feedback that has essentially come back from a lot of folks like you. And this is where we want to basically take the whole thing.
Okay, all right. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Right.